Right, I'm going to read poems that are in English, but they have Welsh in them. I've chosen particularly ones where I can say something about Welsh and you'll hear some Welsh. My situation is that I come from a family where absolutely everybody was Welsh speaking, but my mother thought that her daughter ought to speak English from the start so as to get on in the world. And she was a bit of a snob and she thought English was very grand and that Welsh was not. So she would not let me speak Welsh as a child. So I had to learn it as a young adult. And the part of Wales I live in now is a Welsh-speaking area where more people speak Welsh than don't. The situation is that we're about 3 million people altogether and about under 1 million are Welsh-speaking, but unlike Irish, the language is spoken across all types of people and classes. It's not in just rural areas. There are 30,000, for example, Welsh speakers in the capital city of Cardiff. So there's Welsh all over the country. Though I don't think there's anybody in Wales at all who knows no Welsh. Everybody knows a bit. Many are bilingual. There's nobody left anymore who can speak no English. So English is useful as a communicating language anyway. We take Welsh completely for granted. Everything is, all the big stores, the Marks and Spencers, all those shops have everything in their shops bilingual. When you heard about the battles in the 60s for the language, well, in my house it was easier not to have a television than to have to go to prison, which we would have done had we not paid our television license. Most of the protests were entirely peaceful. They look a bit rough, but they weren't violent really. There was no killing, there was no equivalent of what was going on in Ireland ever happening. I do have friends who did go to prison but it was for a few days for not paying a television license or for doing something like that. Anyway, that's the politics. Now I feel let's just save it by talking it. Let's save the language by making sure that everybody in Wales in the end will be able to speak both languages. And it is true that the children will do the best job of saving the language, because my granddaughter went to an all-Welsh school and she's Welsh speaking, whereas my mother stopped me speaking Welsh. So all of the generation spoke Welsh till me, and now it's picked up again in the next but one generation. Now, I'm choosing a poem first called First Words. And in this poem, there's a lovely sound, and that's the sh sound. Most of the accents you heard, by the way, on that were North Wales accents, which we in South West Wales think is not as nice as our accents. And I have a colleague here in the audience who is the Chief Executive for Literature Wales, and she's got a beautiful, beautiful accent from the village where I now live. And it's the best accent in Wales. My favourite sound is the double L, and there's the sound. And I've got a completely unproved theory that it's because 3 sides of Wales is surrounded by the sea, and most of the people live in those 3 sides. And the sound of the tide breaking on the shore is a kind of sound. Now, my completely ridiculous theory is that this sound developed in the Welsh language, and as far as I know, not in any other language at all, because we're all sea people. I want, the word forest in this poem has got a double F, and it's the name of my grandmother's farm. And you'll hear in this poem the word cariad. Cariad's a beautiful word which means darling, but you can use it to a child, put your shoes on, darling, or as you say in English, we say, hurry up, Cariad, you'll miss the school bus. You see, we use it like that. But it's also a love word, of course. And my favourite other thing in Welsh, a thing that drew me to learn it, apart from feeling that I should, for patriotic reasons, another thing that drew me was a very difficult thing to learn, which is mutations, and that is the beginning of a word changes in certain circumstances. But the perfect example of this is cariad, where it's a casual word that you could use to a strange child running down the road crying. You'd say, Cariad, what's the matter? Oh, you've lost your mother. There she is. It's just a simple word like that, like you'd say love to someone maybe. But if you are using it personally to your true love, and you said, my darling, the k becomes ng. And you say, fy nghariad. And I think that from a plain word to a word of intimate tenderness, that transition is absolutely beautiful and emotionally forceful, and I love it. Anyway, you just hear Cariad here because it was what my grandmother called me. And there's a story in it, which, never mind, a myth that she used to tell me. First words. The alphabet of a house, air, breath, the creak of the stair. Downstairs, the grown-ups hullabaloo or the hush as you fall asleep. You're learning the language, the steel slab of a syllable dropped at the docks, the two-beat word of the breaksea lightship, the golden sentence of a train crossing the viaduct. Later, at Forest, all the words are new. You are your grandmother's Cariad, not darling. Tide and current are llanw, lli. The waves repeat their ell on sand. Over the sea, the starlings come in paragraphs. She tells you a tale of a girl and a bird, reading it off the tide in lines of longhand that scatter to bits on the shore. The sea turns its pages, speaking in tongues. The stories are yours, and you are the story. And before you know it, you'll know what comes from air and breath, and off the page is all you'll want, like the sea's jewels in your hand, and the soft mutations of sea washing on sand. And I'm using the word mutations there to suggest, I picked it up from a language description to describe the sound of the sea. My father tried to sabotage my mother's wish to stop me learning Welsh. My father was an engineer for the BBC, and he used to take me off with him sometimes in the car, and when he was arranging some outside broadcast for the BBC, and we would speak some Welsh in the car that my mother didn't know about. And this poem is called Glas, which means blue, means the, dorlan. That's the kingfisher. It's one of the words for a kingfisher. There are many words for kingfisher. Glas a dorlan. So he said, let's begin by naming the creatures. Once in the Brecon Beacons we stopped for a picnic where the river roared headstrong down the mountain. A sudden electric blue, a shot through the heart. What was that? A bird diving faster than gravity into the pool and up with a fish in its beak. He spoke its name, doused in the shout of the falls. Fisher bird, king of the water, Piodyn y dŵr, Glas a dorlan, blue by the riverbank. Dŵr means water. It's a lovely word for water. Everybody in Wales knows the word for water because it's used to be on the side of the waterboard vans. I'll now move to a completely different kind of poem in a way, but it's not different. Because I believe that if we want to save the planet and its biodiversity, we need to do this not only for creatures and plants, we need to do it also for languages. It's all part of the same gloriously variant earth. And this poem, which is the first poem in the last book I wrote, which is called Ice, the poem is called Polar, because when I was a child, on our living room floor, we had a terrible object, which I adored when I was a little girl. It was a polar bear skin rug, which my father bought in a junk shop. And I think that to me, it's the starting poem in this book, and the whole book really is about, we've got to save everything, not just the material world, not just the ice cap, but languages and cultures. So I don't usually say this, but because of the nature of this conference, I'm stating it. But really, I prefer the whole book to suddenly hit someone. You know, I want them to think, oh yes, it's not only about the planet, it's about more than that. Anyway, polar, snowlight and sunlight, the lake glacial, too bright to open my eyes in the dazzle and doze of a January afternoon. It's long ago, and the house naps in the plush silence of a house asleep like absence. I'm dreaming on the white bear's shoulder, paddling the slow hours, my fingers in his fur. His eyes are glass, each hair a needle of light. He's pegged by his claws to the floor like a shirt on the line. He is a soul, he is what death is. He is transparency, a loosening flow on the sea. But I want him alive. I want him fierce with belly and breath and growl and beating heart. I want him dangerous. I want to follow him over the snows between the immaculate earth and now, between the silence and the shot that rang over the ice at the top of the globe, when the map of the earth was something we knew by heart, and they had not shot the bear, had not loosed the ice, had not. Now, lots of this book is, and I'm not going to read the poems to you, is about the very, very cold winters in succession that we've had, which we aren't used to in Britain. Very, very snowy. And I gradually, as I go through the book, begin to associate the idea of thaw with the return of the language, with the frozen language of my mother loosening. Now, she was very glamorous. She was a very, very beautiful woman. One of 10 children of a farmer, and she was so lovely, famously so in the family and in the area. So she would sit on the beach in a bathing costume, but she never went in the sea because it might mess her hair up. But I just think of her, I imagine her swimming. When the frozen river, now I'd never seen a frozen river in Britain before, but the river froze in Cardiff. And when it thawed, it made me think of language and my mother. Thaw. Tonight the river's on the move in a lovely backstroke, taking the tide with a kick of silk thighs, shoulders heaving the flood through flux and fluency, stroking the keels of coot and mallard, a single swan, rocking a flock of gulls on its palm, coupling grebe, boats at their mooring, on currents swollen with melt of mountain snows. Fluent, sleek as a girl in her silk, kissing goodnight before slipping out to the dance. She'd leave her scent on my pillow, the warmth of her skin on my cheek, cold pooled in the satin folds of her dress, the glint of her rings, her animal wrap of fur. And she's gone, night river slipping its chains, fluent reflective, pulling to sea under winter's weight, freighted with ruin and wrack, a burden of birds, words dead and alive, trees, driftwood, plastic, and all my lost mountain syllables sing on her frozen, loosening tongue, remembered, remembering. Her farm was called Nant Mill. Nant means stream. It's in ruins now, and that's the whole point, really. When you lose an industry, when you lose the thing that keeps people together, you can lose the language that way, because they're no longer meeting in their markets and communities. And so as the rural communities became poorer, so all the young left for elsewhere. And it happened to my mother. She went off to England to be a nurse. But my cousin took me back to see the farm, and here's Nant Mill. As if her broken words were scattered stones, each course of the house unmade, like a thought unspoken. As if the walls, ruined in rampant sycamore, were a language lost to a mumble of elder and bramble. Her story erased by too much silence. As if she stood beside me, checking the place against the photograph, the field gate at the bend where the lane disappears, the cornerstone of the door here where they stood stilled on the threshold in a new century before the wars. As if the gaff in the wall over the river still held the butter churn, its paddle turning where the current is slow with a secret dark, then out with a shining song across the ford, where the horses' hooves once scattered water like sparks, as if she left home one day, no turning back and nothing to say, as if she might whisper again the words for water, horse, mill, stream, dŵr, ceffyl, melyn, nant, in the tongue the clywedog has always sung. And finally, I was asked to write a poem. Lots of people were asked to write a poem for something that was happening, in which various kinds of couples renewed their vows. So, married, gay, civil partnership, living together. If there was poets were asked to write a poem about vows. And my instructions from the person who commissioned them, who was actually the poet laureate of Britain, Carol Ann Duffy, she said, "Gillian, I want a lot of Welsh in yours." So I obeyed. So what I've done, I've called the poem Gwell, Gwaith, for better, for worse. And the first line of each verse here is the first line of the wedding vows in the Book of Common Prayer. So, Ar fod rwy hon i'r priodaf is the first one. I mean, the first one is with this ring I thee wed, and the second one, with my body I thee worship, and the last one, with all my worldly goods I thee endow. And I'd just like to tell you that the word cariad is coming up again. And I live in the county of Ceredigion in central West Wales, and a special magic which is often used in Welsh poetry happens with, if you put Ceredigion and cariad together, you get 3 consonants in a row in the same sequence, following each other in 2 words, and that's called Cynhanedd. It's a special, ancient, back to the 6th century tradition of that happens in Welsh language poetry. So I did it sort of in this poem, which is basically in English. And I got married in Welsh. I've been married twice. My second marriage, which I've been married for a very long time to my husband. He is an architect, which you need to know for something that happens in the 3rd verse. And we got married in Welsh. Gwell, gwaith. Ar fod rwy hon i'r priodaf. Something about the ring in the blackbird's eye on an April evening, the raptor's jeweled stare, the marriage of sun and rain on dancing water, the circle of my arms around sheets off the line, yours bringing armfuls of wood for the fire. Am corff ith am rhydeddaf. Something of touch, taste, tongue, the language of hands, those chemical gifts one to the other, grace and gesture, silence, reflection, that pair for life 2 swans on a river, soundlessly sculling the stream, lover to lover. Am holl olit bydol ith gynnes gaiddaf. My dowry, a derelict house on a hill, 5 fields, 2 acres of bluebells onto oaks. Yours of vision. You made sound the ruin, dreamed space and light, a room of oak and glass, let in the sky, the hills, and all of Ceredigion cariad in a glance.